Section 6, Parts 27 to 35 of The Painted Veil by Somerset Maugham. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. Part 27. Walter was in when she got home. She would have liked to go straight to her room, but he was downstairs in the hall giving instructions to one of the boys. She was so wretched that she welcomed the humiliation to which she must expose herself. She stopped and faced him. "I'm coming with you to that place," she said. "Oh, good. When do you want me to be ready?" "Tomorrow night." She did not know what spirit of bravado entered into her. His indifference was like the prick of a spear. She said a thing that surprised herself. "I suppose I needn't take more than a few summer things and a shroud, need I?" She was watching his face and knew that her flippancy angered him. "I've already told your Amma what you'll want." She nodded and went up to her room. She was very pale. Part 28. They were reaching their destination at last. They were borne in chairs day after day along a narrow causeway between interminable rice fields. They set out at dawn and travelled till the heat of the day forced them to take shelter in a wayside inn, and then went on again till they reached the town where they had arranged to spend the night. Kitty's chair headed the procession, and Walter followed her. Then in a struggling line came the coolies that bore their bedding, stores, and equipment. Kitty passed through the country with unseeing eyes. All through the long hours, the silence broken only by an occasional remark from one of the bearers or a snatch of uncouth song, she turned over in her tortured mind the details of that heart-rending scene in Charlie's office. Recalling what he had said to her and what she had said to him, she was dismayed to see what an arid and businesslike turn their conversation had taken. She had not said what she wanted to say, and she had not spoken in the tone she intended. Had she been able to make him see her boundless love, the passion in her heart, and her helplessness, he would never have been so inhuman as to leave her to her fate. She had been taken unawares. She could hardly believe her ears when he told her, more clearly than with words, that he cared nothing for her. That was why she had not even cried very much. She had been so dazed. She had wept since, wept miserably. At night in the inns, sharing the principal guest chamber with her husband, and conscious that Walter, lying on his camp bed a few feet away from her, lay awake, she dug her teeth in the pillows so that no sound might escape her. But in the daytime, protected by the curtains of her chair, she allowed herself to give way. Her pain was so great that she could have screamed at the top of her voice. She had never known that one could suffer so much, and she asked herself desperately what she had done to deserve it. She could not make out why Charlie did not love her. It was her fault, she supposed, but she had done everything she knew to make him fond of her. They had always got on so well. They laughed all the time they were together. They were not only lovers but good friends. She could not understand. She was broken. She told herself that she hated and despised him, but she had no idea how she was going to live if she was never to see him again. If Walter was taking her to Mai Tan Fu as a punishment, he was making a fool of himself, for what did she care now what became of her? She had nothing to live for any more. It was rather hard to be finished with life at 27. Part 29. On the steamer that took them up the Western River, Walter read incessantly. But at mealtimes he endeavored to make some kind of conversation. He talked to her as though she were a stranger with whom he happened to be making the journey, of indifferent things, from politeness, Kitty imagined, or because so he could render more marked the gulf that separated them. In a flash of insight she had told Charlie that Walter had sent her to him with the threat of divorce as the alternative to her accompanying him to the stricken city, in order that she might see for herself how indifferent, cowardly, and selfish he was. It was true. It was a trick which accorded very well with his sardonic humor. He knew exactly what would happen, and he had given her necessary instructions before her return. She had caught in his eyes a disdain which seemed to include her lover as well as herself. He said to himself, perhaps, that if he had been in Townsend's place, nothing in the world would have hindered him from making any sacrifice to gratify her smallest whim. She knew that was true also. But then, when her eyes were opened, how could he make her do something which was so dangerous, and which he must know frightened her so terribly? At first she thought he was only playing with her, until they actually started, no, later, till they left the river and took to the chairs for the journey across country. She thought he would give that little laugh of his and tell her that she need not come. She had no inkling of what was in his mind. He could not really desire her death. He had loved her so desperately. She knew what love was now, and she remembered 1,000 signs of his adoration. For him, really, in the French phrase, she did make fine weather and foul. It was impossible that he did not love her still. Did you cease to love a person because you had been treated cruelly? She had not made him suffer as Charlie had made her suffer, and yet if Charlie made a sign, notwithstanding everything, even though she knew him now, she would abandon all the world had to offer and fly to his arms. Even though he had sacrificed her and cared nothing for her, even though he was callous and unkind, she loved him. At first she thought she had only to bide her time, and sooner or later Walter would forgive her. She had been too confident of her power over him to believe that it was gone forever. Many waters could not quench love. He was weak if he loved her, and felt that love her he must. But now she was not quite sure. When in the evening he sat reading in the straight-backed blackwood chair of the inn with the light of a hurricane lamp on his face, she was able to watch him at her ease. She lay on the pallet on which her bed presently would be set, and she was in shadow. Those straight, regular features of his made his face look very severe. You could hardly believe that it was possible for them on occasion to be changed by so sweet a smile. He was able to read as calmly as though she were 1,000 miles away. She saw him turn the pages, and she saw his eyes move regularly as they traveled from line to line. He was not thinking of her. And when, the table being set and dinner brought in, he put aside his book and gave her a glance, not knowing how the light on his face threw into distinctness his expression, she was startled to see in his eyes a look of physical distaste. Yes, it startled her. Was it possible that his love had left him entirely? Was it possible that he really designed her death? It was absurd. That would be the act of a madman. It was odd, the little shiver that ran through her as the thought occurred to her that perhaps Walter was not quite sane. Part 30. Suddenly her bearers, long silent, began to speak, and one of them, turning round, with words she could not understand and with a gesture, sought to attract her attention. She looked in the direction he pointed, and there, on the top of the hill, saw an archway. She knew by now that it was a memorial in compliment of a fortunate scholar or a virtuous widow. She had passed many of them since they left the river. But this one, silhouetted against the westerning sun, was more fantastic and beautiful than any she had seen. Yet she knew not why it made her uneasy. It had a significance which she felt could not be put into words. Was it a menace that she vaguely discerned, or was it derision? She was passing a grove of bamboos, and they leaned over the causeway strangely as if they would detain her. Though the summer evening was windless, their narrow green leaves shivered a little. It gave her the sensation that someone hidden among them was watching her as she passed. Now they came to the foot of the hill, and the rice fields ceased. The bearers took it with a swinging stride. The hill was covered close with little green mounds, close to one another, so that the ground was ribbed like the sea sand when the tide has gone out. And this she knew too, for she had passed just such a spot as they approached each populous city and left it. It was the graveyard. Now she knew why the bearers had called her attention to the archway that stood on the crest of the hill. They had reached the end of their journey. They passed through the archway, and the chair-bearers paused to change the pole from shoulder to shoulder. One of them wiped his sweating face with a dirty rag. The causeway wound down. There were bedraggled houses on each side. Now the night was falling, but the bearers on a sudden broke into excited talk, and with a jump that shook her ranged themselves as near as they could to the wall. In a moment she knew what had startled them, for as they stood there chattering to one another, 4 peasants passed, quick and silent, bearing a new coffin, unpainted, and its fresh wood gleamed white in the approaching darkness. Kitty felt her heart beat in terror against her ribs. The coffin passed, but the bearers stood still. It seemed as though they could not summon up the will to go on. But there was a shout from behind, and they started. They did not speak now. They walked for a few minutes longer and then turned sharply into an open gateway. The chair was set down. She had arrived. Part 31. It was a bungalow, and she entered the sitting-room. She sat down while the coolies, straggling in one by one, brought in their loads. Walter in the courtyard gave directions where this or that was to be placed. She was very tired. She was startled to hear an unknown voice. "May I come in?" She flushed and grew pale. She was overwrought, and it made her nervous to meet a stranger. A man came out of the darkness, for the long, low room was lit only by a shaded lamp, and held out his hand. "My name is Waddington. I'm the Deputy Commissioner." "Oh, the customs. I know. I heard that you were here." In that dim light she could see only that he was a little, thin man, no taller than she, with a bald head and a small, bare face. "I live just at the bottom of the hill, but coming in this way you wouldn't have seen my house. I thought you'd be too fagged to come and dine with me, so I've ordered your dinner here, and I've invited myself." "I'm delighted to hear it." "You'll find the cook's not bad. I kept home Watson's boys for you." "Watson was the missionary who was here?" "Yes, very nice fellow. I'll show you his grave tomorrow, if you like." "How kind you are," said Kitty with a smile. At that moment Walter came in. Waddington had introduced himself to him before coming in to see Kitty, and now he said, "I've just been breaking in to your missus that I'm dining with you. Since Watson died, I haven't had anybody much to talk to but the nuns, and I can never do myself justice in French. Besides, there is only a limited number of subjects you can talk to them about." "I've just told the boy to bring in some drinks," said Walter. The servant brought whiskey and soda, and Kitty noticed that Waddington helped himself generously. His manner of speaking and his easy chuckle had suggested to her when he came in that he was not quite sober. "Here's luck," he said. Then turning to Walter, "You've got your work cut out for you here. They're dying like flies. The magistrate's lost his head, and Colonel Yu, the officer commanding the troops, is having a devil of a job to prevent them from looting. If something doesn't happen soon, we shall all be murdered in our beds. I tried to get the nuns to go, but of course they wouldn't. They all want to be martyrs, damn 'em." He spoke lightly, and there was in his voice a sort of ghostly laughter, so that you could not listen to him without smiling. "Why haven't you gone?" asked Walter. "Well, I've lost half my staff, and the others are ready to lie down and die at any minute. Somebody's got to stay and keep things together." "Have you been inoculated?" "Yes, Watson did me. But he did himself, too, and it didn't do him much good, poor blighter." He turned to Kitty, and his funny little face was gaily puckered. "I don't think there's any great risk if you take proper precautions. Have your milk boiled, and don't eat fresh fruit or uncooked vegetables. Have you brought any gramophone records with you?" "No, I don't think so," said Kitty. "I'm sorry for that. I was hoping you would. I haven't had any for a long time, and I'm sick of my old ones." The boy came in to ask if they would have dinner. "You won't dress tonight, will you?" asked Waddington. "My boy died last week, and the boy I have now is a fool, so I haven't been dressing in the evening." "I'll go and take off my hat," said Kitty. Her room was next door to that in which they sat. It was barely furnished. An ama was kneeling on the floor, the lamp beside her, unpacking Kitty's things. Part 32. The dining room was small, and the greater part of it was filled by an immense table. On the walls were engravings of scenes from the Bible and illuminated texts. "Missionaries always have large dining tables," Waddington explained. "They get so much more a year for every child they have, and they buy their tables when they marry so that there'll be plenty of room for little strangers." From the ceiling hung a large paraffin lamp, so that Kitty was able to see better what sort of a man Waddington was. His baldness had deceived her into thinking him no longer young, but she saw now that he must be well under 40. His face, small under a high, rounded forehead, was unlined and fresh-colored. It was ugly like a monkey's, but with an ugliness that was not without charm. It was an amusing face. His features, his nose, and his mouth were hardly larger than a child's, and he had small, very bright blue eyes. His eyebrows were fair and scanty. He looked like a funny little old boy. He helped himself constantly to liquor, and as dinner proceeded it became evident that he was far from sober. But if he was drunk, it was without offensiveness, gaily as a satyr might be who had stolen a wineskin from a sleeping shepherd. He talked of Hong Kong. He had many friends there, and he wanted to know about them. He had been down for the races a year before, and he talked of ponies and their owners. "By the way, what about Townsend?" he asked suddenly. "Is he going to become Colonial Secretary?" Kitty felt herself flush, but her husband did not look at her. "I shouldn't wonder," he answered. "He's the sort that gets on." "Do you know him?" asked Walter. "Yes, I know him pretty well. We traveled out from home together once." From the other side of the river they heard the beating of gongs and the clatter of firecrackers. There, so short away from them, the great city lay in terror, and death, sudden and ruthless, hurried through its tortuous streets. But Waddington began to speak of London. He talked of the theaters. He knew everything that was being played at the moment, and he told them what pieces he had seen when he was last home on leave. He laughed as he recollected the humor of this low comedian, and sighed as he reflected on the beauty of that star of musical comedy. He was pleased to be able to boast that a cousin of his had married one of the most celebrated. He had lunched with her, and she had given him her photograph. He would show it to them when they came and dined with him at the customs. Walter looked at his guest with a cold and ironic gaze, but he was evidently not a little amused by him, and he made an effort to show a civil interest in topics of which Kitty was well aware he knew nothing. A faint smile lingered on his lips, but Kitty, she knew not why, was filled with awe. In the house of that dead missionary over against the stricken city, they seemed immeasurably apart from all the world, three solitary creatures and strangers to each other. Dinner was finished, and she rose from the table. "Do you mind if I say good night to you? I'm going to bed." "I'll take myself off. I expect the doctor wants to go to bed, too," answered Waddington. "We must be out early tomorrow." He shook hands with Kitty. He was quite steady on his feet, but his eyes were shining more than ever. "I'll come and fetch you," he told Walter, "and take you to see the magistrate and Colonel Hugh, and then we'll go along to the convent. You've got your work cut out, I can tell you." Part 33. Her night was tortured with strange dreams. She seemed to be carried in her chair, and she felt the swaying motion as the bearers marched with their long, uneven stride. She entered cities, vast and dim, where the multitude thronged about her with curious eyes. The streets were narrow and tortuous, and in the open shops, with their strange wares, all traffic stopped as she went by, and those who bought and those who sold paused. Then she came to the memorial arch, and its fantastic outline seemed on a sudden to gain a monstrous life. Its capricious contours were like the waving arms of a Hindu god, and as she passed under it she heard the echo of mocking laughter. But then Charlie Townsend came towards her and took her in his arms, lifting her out of the chair, and said it was all a mistake. He had never meant to treat her as he had, for he loved her, and he couldn't live without her. She felt his kisses on her mouth, and she wept with joy, asking him why he had been so cruel, and though she asked, she knew it did not matter. And then there was a hoarse, abrupt cry, and they were separated, and between, hurrying silently, coolies passed in their ragged blue, and they bore a coffin. She awoke with a start. The bungalow stood halfway down a steep hill, and from her window she saw the narrow river below her, and opposite the city. The dawn had just broken, and from the river rose a white mist shrouding the junks that lay moored close to one another like peas in a pod. There were hundreds of them, and they were silent, mysterious in that ghostly light, and you had a feeling that their crews lay under an enchantment, for it seemed that it was not sleep, but something strange and terrible that held them so still and mute. The morning drew on, and the sun touched the mist so that it shone whitely like the ghost of snow on a dying star. Though on the river it was light, so that you could discern palely the lines of the crowded junks and the thick forest of their masts, in front it was a shining wall the eye could not pierce. But suddenly from that white cloud a tall, grim, and massive bastion emerged. It seemed not merely to be made visible by the all-discovering sun, but rather to rise out of nothing at the touch of a magic wand. It towered, the stronghold of a cruel and barbaric race, over the river. But the magician who built worked swiftly, and now a fragment of colored wall crowned the bastion. In a moment, out of the mist, looming vastly and touched here and there by a yellow ray of sun, there was seen a cluster of green and yellow roofs. Huge they seemed, and you could make out no pattern. The order, if order there was, escaped you, wayward and extravagant, but of an unimaginable richness. There was no fortress, not a temple, but the magic place of some emperor of the gods where no man might enter. It was too airy, fantastic, and unsubstantial to be the work of human hands. It was the fabric of a dream. The tears ran down Kitty's face, and she gazed, her hands clasped to her breast and her mouth, for she was breathless, open a little. She had never felt so light of heart, and it seemed to her as though her body were a shell that lay at her feet, and she pure spirit. Here was beauty. She took it as the believer takes in his mouth the wafer which is God. Part 34. Since Walter went out early in the morning, came back at tiffin only for half an hour, and did not then return till dinner was just ready, Kitty found herself much alone. For some days she did not stir from the bungalow. It was very hot, and for the most part she lay in a long chair by the open window, trying to read. The hard light of midday had robbed the magic palace of its mystery, and now it was no more than a temple on the city wall, garish and shabby. But because she had seen it once in such an ecstasy, it was never again quite commonplace, and often at dawn or at dusk, and again at night, she found herself able to recapture something of that beauty. What had seemed to her a mighty bastion was but the city wall, and on this, massive and dark, her eyes rested continually. Behind its crenellations lay the city in the dread grip of the pestilence. Vaguely she knew that terrible things were happening there, not from Walter, who, when she questioned him, for otherwise he rarely spoke to her, answered with a humorous nonchalance which sent a shiver down her spine, but from Waddington and from the Ama. The people were dying at the rate of 100 a day, and hardly any of those who were attacked by the disease recovered from it. The gods had been brought out from the abandoned temples and placed in the streets. Offerings were laid before them, and sacrifices made, but they did not stay the plague. The people died so fast that it was hardly possible to bury them. In some houses the whole family had been swept away, and there was none to perform the funeral rites. The officer commanding the troops was a masterful man, and if the city was not given over to riot and arson, it was due to his determination. He forced his soldiers to bury such as there was no one else to bury, and he had shot with his own hand an officer who demurred at entering a stricken house. Kitty sometimes was so frightened that her heart sank within her, and she would tremble in every limb. It was all very well to say that the risk was small if you took reasonable precautions. She was panic-stricken. She turned over in her mind crazy plans of escape. To get away, just to get away, she was prepared to set out as she was and make her way alone, without anything but what she stood up in, to some place of safety. She thought of throwing herself on the mercy of Waddington, telling him of everything and beseeching him to help her to get back to Hong Kong. If she flung herself on her knees before her husband and admitted that she was frightened, even though he hated her now, he must have enough human feeling in him to pity her. It was out of the question. If she went, where could she go? Not to her mother. Her mother would make her see very plainly that having married her off, she counted on being rid of her, and besides, she did not want to go to her mother. She wanted to go to Charlie, and he did not want her. She knew what he would say if she suddenly appeared before him. She saw the sullen look on his face and the shrewd hardness behind his charming eyes. It would be difficult for him to find words that sounded well. She clenched her hands. She would have given anything to humiliate him as he had humiliated her. Sometimes she was seized with such a frenzy that she wished she had let Walter divorce her, ruining herself if only she could have ruined him too. Certain things he had said to her made her blush with shame when she recalled them. Part 35. The first time she was alone with Waddington, she brought the conversation round to Charlie. Waddington had spoken of him on the evening of their arrival. She pretended that he was no more than an acquaintance of her husband. "I never cared much for him," said Waddington. "I've always thought him a bore." "You must be very hard to please," returned Kitty in the bright, chaffing way she could assume so easily. "I suppose he's far and away the most popular man in Hong Kong." "I know. That's his stock in trade. He's made a science of popularity. He has the gift of making everyone he meets feel that he is the one person in the world he wants to see. He's always ready to do a service that isn't any trouble to himself, and even if he doesn't do what you want, he manages to give you the impression that it's only because it's not humanly possible." "That's surely an attractive trait." "Charm and nothing but charm at last grows a little tiresome, I think. It's a relief, then, to deal with a man who isn't quite so delightful, but a little more sincere. I've known Charlie Johnson for a good many years, and once or twice I've caught him with the mask off. You see, I never mattered, just a subordinate official in the customs, and I know that he doesn't in his heart give a damn for anyone in the world but himself." Kitty, lounging easily in her chair, looked at him with smiling eyes. She turned her wedding ring round and round her finger. "Of course he'll get on. He knows all the official ropes. Before I die, I have every belief that I shall address him as Your Excellency and stand up when he enters the room." "Most people think he deserves to get on. He's generally supposed to have a great deal of ability." "Ability? What nonsense! He's a very stupid man. He gives you the impression that he dashes off his work and gets it through with sheer brilliancy. Nothing of the kind. He's as industrious as a Eurasian clerk." "How has he got the reputation of being so clever?" "There are many foolish people in the world, and when a man in a rather high position puts on no frills, slaps them on the back, and tells them he'll do anything in the world for them, they're very likely to think him clever. And then, of course, there's his wife. There's an able woman, if you like. She has a good sound head, and her advice is always worth taking. As long as Charlie Townsend's got her to depend on, he's pretty safe never to do a foolish thing, and that's the first thing necessary for a man to get on in government service. They don't want clever men. Clever men have ideas, and ideas cause trouble. They want men who have charm and tact and who can be counted on never to make a blunder. Oh, yes, Charlie Townsend will get to the top of the tree all right." "I wonder why you dislike him." "I don't dislike him." "But you like his wife better?" smiled Kitty. "I'm an old-fashioned little man, and I like a well-bred woman." "I wish she were well-dressed as well-bred." "Doesn't she dress well? I never noticed." "I've always heard they were a devoted couple," said Kitty, watching him through her eyelashes. "He's very fond of her. I'll give him that credit. I think that's the most decent thing about him." "Cold praise." "He has his little flirtations, but they're not serious. He's much too cunning to let them go on to such lengths as might cause him inconvenience. And, of course, he isn't a passionate man. He's only a vain one. He likes admiration. He's fat and 40 now. He does himself too well, but he was very good-looking when he first came to the colony. I've often heard his wife chaff him about his conquests." "She doesn't take his flirtations very seriously?" "Oh, no, she knows they don't go very far. She says she'd like to be able to make friends of the poor little things who fall to Charlie, but they're always so common. She says it's really not very flattering to her that the women who fall in love with her husband are so uncommonly second-rate." End of section 6.